conference room on the 42nd floor had a view of downtown Charlotte that my grandfather used to say looked like proof God believed in ambition. I had stood at that window 100 times. I never thought the last time I stood there, my father would be the one trying to destroy me. He was already speaking when I walked in. That was deliberate. He wanted me off balance before I even sat down. "We've completed the internal review," my father said, not looking at me. "And effective immediately, Daniel is removed from all operational roles at Hargrove Capital. His access has been revoked. His shares are frozen pending the outcome of the investigation." There were 11 people in that room. 3 board members. 2 outside counsel. My father's wife, sitting 2 seats to his right with her hands folded like she was at church. Her son beside her, a yellow legal pad in front of him. A pen he kept clicking. And then me, standing at the door I had just walked through, holding a manila envelope that nobody in that room knew existed yet. My father finally looked at me. I sat down. "Let me tell you how we got here. My grandfather built Hargrove Capital with a $40,000 loan from a credit union in 1979 and a reputation for never lying to a client. By the time he handed it to my father in 2001, it managed $200 million in real estate assets across 4 states. By the time my father handed me a VP title and an office 3 floors below his in 2019, it was worth just under $900 million. I had worked there since I was 22. I started in the mailroom, not as a story, not as a lesson my father arranged. I genuinely started in the mailroom because he told me I would start where everyone else started, or I would not start at all. I spent 6 years learning every floor of that company. I knew the names of the property managers in Raleigh. I knew which contractors cut corners and which ones would call you at midnight if they found a problem. I knew the portfolio better than anyone except my father and Helen, our head of accounting, who had been with the company for 19 years. My mother passed away when I was 16. My father grieved quietly for a long time. He dated occasionally. I never thought much of it. He was 61 years old. He had built something remarkable, and he deserved companionship. Then he met my stepmother at a real estate conference in Atlanta in the spring of 2021. She was polished, intelligent, and she laughed at everything he said. She had a son from a previous marriage named Marcus, who was 29 and had spent 3 years at a mid-tier investment firm in Atlanta before it closed due to what was politely described in the industry as regulatory complications. My father married her 14 months later. Marcus joined Hargrove Capital 6 weeks after the wedding. He was given the title of Director of Strategic Acquisitions. He had no portfolio, no track record that I could verify, and an office 2 floors below mine that was somehow larger than mine. I told myself it was not a problem. I told myself I was being territorial. I told myself my father was happy. I watched Marcus for 8 months before I understood what he was doing. He was not incompetent, which is what I had originally assumed. He was deliberate. Every week, he would copy my father on an email summarizing a project I was leading, framing it slightly wrong. Not obviously wrong. Just enough to plant a seed. He would mention a deadline I had flagged as flexible as if it were a failure. He would describe a conservative decision I had made as hesitation. He would ask my father, in those emails, casual questions that implied I had not been communicating clearly. At the same time, he was pulling numbers. Not large amounts at first. I only noticed because Helen noticed, and Helen told me. Helen was 63 years old and had been doing the books at Hargrove Capital since before I was allowed in the building. She called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon in October of last year, and she closed the door, which she had never done in my presence before. "I need to show you something," she said, "and I need you to understand that I have not shown this to anyone else, and I need your word that you'll protect me before I show it." I gave her my word. She had found it 3 months earlier. A series of management fee adjustments on 4 properties in the South Carolina portfolio, processed through a vendor account that had been created 8 months prior. The vendor was called Meridian Advisory Group. It had a website, a registered address in Delaware, and a phone number that went to voicemail. Helen had called 6 times. She had also run the registration documents, which listed a managing member whose name I recognized as Marcus's college roommate. Over 11 months, Meridian Advisory Group had invoiced Hargrove Capital $2.3 million for consulting services. The invoices had been approved through a secondary authorization channel that Marcus had requested access to, and had been granted 4 months after joining the company. Helen had compiled everything, not because she had been asked to. Because she was Helen, and Helen believed that the numbers told the truth even when the people didn't. She handed me a USB drive and a printed ledger with every transaction flagged in yellow highlighter. She had cross-referenced the wire transfers with the vendor registration dates. She had pulled the approval chain. She had documented it the way someone documents things when they know they may only get one chance to present it. "I haven't gone to your father," she said. "I don't think your father is safe to go to right now." I looked at her. "She has his ear completely," Helen said. "And whatever he hears from her, he believes." I took the drive home that night. I sat at my kitchen table until 2 in the morning going through every file. Helen was meticulous. The pattern was undeniable. I forwarded everything to an attorney I trusted, a woman named Patricia who had done work for the company years earlier and had no current relationship with anyone in my family. I asked her to verify the documents were legally sufficient and to advise me on how to proceed. Patricia called me back in 48 hours. She told me the documentation was solid. She told me I needed to be careful. She told me that the right time to present this was in front of witnesses who could not be dismissed or managed afterward. I waited. 3 weeks later, my father called me into his office on a Friday afternoon and told me there was going to be an internal review. He said that some financial discrepancies had been identified in the South Carolina portfolio. He said that the review would be neutral and thorough. He did not look at me the way a father looks at a son. He looked at me the way someone looks at a problem. My stepmother was not in the room. She did not need to be. I could feel the shape of her there anyway. I understood then that Marcus had moved first. He had taken the very discrepancies that Helen had flagged, the ones he had created, and he had brought them to my father before I could. He had reframed them. He had put my name on them. I did not say anything to my father that afternoon. I thanked him for telling me directly. I said I was confident the review would show the truth. I went back to my office and I called Patricia and I told her we needed to move faster than we had planned. Patricia filed a formal request with the board's Independent Oversight Committee, a provision that existed in the company's governance documents and that, I suspect, my stepmother had never thought to check. The request triggered a mandatory board review session within 30 days, with all parties present and legally represented. It could not be canceled by my father alone. It required a quorum. My father found out 2 days later. He called me. He said I was making things worse. He said I was being aggressive and that it was going to damage the company. He said, and I remember this exactly, that he had expected more loyalty from me. I told him I had nothing but loyalty for what my grandfather built. I told him I would see him at the board meeting. He hung up without saying goodbye. The 30 days between that call and the board meeting were the quietest month of my life. I moved through the office like a man who had already accepted the outcome. I answered emails. I went to property reviews. I ate lunch alone at my desk most days. My stepmother passed me in the hallway once and smiled at me in a way that I recognized as the particular smile of someone who believes they have already won. Marcus stopped clicking his pen when I walked into rooms. He just watched me now. Helen and I did not speak at the office. She had taken medical leave, genuinely. She had a knee surgery she had been postponing, and I was grateful for the timing because it kept her away from the building when things got tense. Patricia and I met 4 times in those 30 days. We went through every document. We prepared for every possible counter-argument. Patricia told me once, during one of those late evenings at her office, that she had handled a lot of cases involving family businesses, and that what made them different from other cases was that the goal was never just to win. The goal was to survive. I understood what she meant. The morning of the board meeting, I woke up at 5. I made coffee. I sat at the window in my apartment that looked out over the city, and I thought about my grandfather. He used to say that a reputation was the only thing a man built that outlasted the building. He had a gift for simplifying things in ways that only made sense later. I put on a dark suit. I picked up the manila envelope from my desk. I drove to the building. My father was already speaking when I walked in. I sat down. He finished a statement about my removal. One of the board members, a man named Robert who had been with the company since the beginning, who had known my grandfather, cleared his throat and said, "Daniel, do you have a response?" "Yes," I said. "I do." I placed the envelope on the table. I want to describe the room in that moment because I have thought about it many times since. My father's jaw had set in the way it set when he was trying to appear certain. My stepmother had shifted slightly in her chair, Just slightly, maybe 2 inches. But I noticed it. Marcus had stopped clicking the pen. He had set it down flat. I opened the envelope and I removed 3 documents. I slid 1 copy down the table to each of the 3 board members. I placed 1 copy in front of the outside counsel. I placed the last copy in front of my father. What you have in front of you, I said, is a forensic accounting summary compiled over approximately 5 months by our head of accounting, Helen, who has been with this company for 19 years. It documents $2.3 million in payments made to a vendor entity called Meridian Advisory Group through a secondary authorization channel that was created and controlled by Marcus. I paused. Meridian Advisory Group, I continued, is not a real consulting firm. Its registered managing member is a personal associate of Marcus's with no financial credentials. The company has no verifiable employees, no office space beyond a registered address, and no record of providing any services to any client other than Hargrove Capital. I have the registration documents, the wire transfer records, the approval chain, and the vendor creation request all documented in that packet. The room was quiet in a specific way, not the quiet of people who have nothing to say, the quiet of people who are deciding what to do with what they are hearing. The financial discrepancies in the South Carolina portfolio that were brought to my father's attention, I said, are real. But they did not originate from me. They originate from these transactions. The authorization trail makes that clear. Robert picked up the document. He turned to the 2nd page. He turned to the 3rd page. He was not a man who spoke quickly, and he did not speak quickly now. My stepmother said, "This is fabricated." She said it calmly. She had probably prepared that line. Helen compiled this independently, I said. She has the original files. She is prepared to testify to the methodology. Patricia, my attorney, can address the chain of custody for every document in that packet. Patricia, sitting beside me, confirmed this without looking up from her own copy. Marcus, one of the other board members, said. His name is Franklin, and he had a reputation for directness that I had always respected. Do you want to respond to this? Marcus looked at his mother. It was a fast look, the kind that is supposed to be invisible. It was not invisible. I want to consult with counsel, he said. Franklin set down the document. I think that's probably the right instinct, he said. My father had not said anything. He was looking at the papers in front of him. I watched him turn to the vendor creation requests, page 4 of the packet, the one with Marcus's digital signature on the access authorization. He looked at it for a long time. I had spent 30 days wondering how I would feel in this moment. I had expected something like anger or relief or vindication, the clean kind that arrives when you have been right and now everyone knows it. What I felt instead was something much quieter and much sadder. I felt the specific grief of watching someone you love realize they were wrong, knowing that the realization will not undo any of the damage it caused. My father was not a bad man. He was a man who had been lonely and had trusted the wrong person and had let that trust override things he should have known better than to override. That was not a simple failure, but it was still a failure. The board voted to suspend the removal action pending a full independent audit. They voted to place Marcus on administrative leave with immediate access revocation. They voted to refer the Meridian advisory transactions to outside legal counsel for further review. My stepmother left the room before the second vote. Marcus followed her. My father sat in his chair after everyone else had begun gathering their things. I stood up. I picked up my envelope. I walked to the window, the one with the view of downtown Charlotte that my grandfather said looked like proof God believed in ambition, and I stood there for a moment. My father said my name. I turned around. He looked older than he had looked that morning, not in years, in something harder to measure. I should have asked you first, he said. I had thought about what I would say if he said something like this. I had thought about it many times, in the apartment at 2 a.m, in Patricia's office. On the drive-in that morning, I had constructed careful answers, measured ones that said what I needed to say without closing any doors I did not intend to close. What I said was, yeah, you should have. Then I walked out. The hallway was empty. The elevator was empty. The lobby was empty except for the security guard at the desk who had worked in that building for 11 years and who had watched me grow up in it. He looked at me as I passed. Have a good evening, Daniel, he said. Thank you, Gerald, I said. You too. I pushed through the glass door and stepped outside into a November evening that was cold and clear and smelled faintly of rain that had fallen earlier in the day. I stood on the sidewalk and I looked up at the building, 42 floors, my grandfather's name on a plaque in the lobby, the work of 3 generations inside those walls. I thought about what it cost, not in dollars, in what actually gets spent when a family decides that money is worth more than honesty. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes. Then I started walking. In the weeks that followed, the independent audit confirmed everything in Helen's documentation. The outside counsel determined that Marcus had created Meridian Advisory Group 11 months into his tenure at the company. The total extracted over the period came to $2.4 million when the audit captured 2 additional transactions Helen had not yet flagged. Marcus's attorney negotiated a repayment agreement and a plea arrangement with the DA's office. The details were not made public, but Patricia kept me informed. Helen came back from medical leave and found a substantial bonus in her paycheck that my father had authorized without telling anyone. She called me to ask if I knew about it. I told her I did not, but that I was glad. She said he needed to do something right. I told her that was fair. My father called me 3 times in the 2 months after the board meeting. The first call I did not answer. The second call I answered, and I listened, and I said I needed more time. The third call, we talked for 40 minutes. It was not easy. It was not resolved. Some things between us had broken cleanly enough that they could eventually be repaired. Others had broken in ways that would take longer than a phone call to understand. We are not where we were. I am not certain we will get back there. But I am not close to it. I did not return to Hargrove Capital. That decision was mine, and I made it before the board meeting even concluded. There are things you can go through in a place and still go back to work there the following Monday. This was not one of them. I handed in my formal resignation 2 weeks after the board meeting, with 60 days' notice, which I fulfilled because the grandfather whose name was on that building deserved to have his company transition responsibly. On my last day, I carried 1 box out. It was lighter than I expected. 11 years in a building and you accumulate less than you think. A framed photo of my grandfather and me at the groundbreaking of the Raleigh property. 2015, the year he was still healthy enough to travel. A small wooden plaque he had given me when I finished my first year at the company. A coffee mug from a client in Greenville who had sent a case of them as a thank you gift years ago. I put the box in my car. I sat for a minute in the parking garage, not moving, just sitting in the quiet of a car engine that had not yet started. Then I drove home. 4 months later, I opened a small advisory firm with a man I had worked with early in my career. A woman who had been a portfolio manager at a competing firm for 8 years and wanted something different, and Helen, who had finally decided she was ready to retire from Hargrove Capital and who joined us in a part-time consulting capacity because she said she was not ready to stop working entirely. We work out of a rented office on the 4th floor of a building in the No-Dawn neighborhood of Charlotte. It is not 42 floors. The view is a parking lot in the back of a coffee shop. On the day we moved in, I put my grandfather's framed photo on the shelf above my desk, next to a copy of the original Hargrove Capital founding documents that he had given me years earlier, and a ledger from our first closed deal. Someone asked me recently whether I was angry. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I am not angry. Anger assumes the other person has ongoing power over you. What I feel is closer to clarity. The kind that costs something to earn and does not let you pretend anymore. I know what my father prioritized when it mattered. I know what I was willing to do to protect something worth protecting. I know which people stood in the light when the room got dark and which ones found reasons to look away. My stepmother and Marcus relocated to Atlanta. My father is still running the company. I heard from Robert that the board has implemented stronger vendor approval controls and a segregated authorization process. I was glad to hear it. Not for the people involved. For what my grandfather built. That place deserves better than what it went through. On a Thursday morning in early March, I arrived at the office before my partners and I made coffee, and I stood at the 4th floor window and looked out at the parking lot and the back of the coffee shop and the gray Charlotte morning coming in low over the rooftops. My grandfather used to say a reputation was the only thing a man built that outlasted the building. I think what he meant was that it was not really about the building at all. I picked up my coffee, I sat down at my desk, I opened my laptop. I had 3 calls before 10 and a property review in the afternoon and a draft agreement that needed to go back to council by end of week. I started working.